Hi, everybody. I'm Tevis Trower, founder of Balance Integration and author of my new book. Woo! Thank you. And Tony's here. And welcome to Game Changer Chats. I think this is our 10th chat.
Wow.
And we have been doing this basically because now is a time for game change. Now is a time for all of us to step into that greatness inside of us, that voice inside of us that says life is to be lived fully and in alignment with our deepest held values. So at the beginning of the summer, knowing that the book was coming out, I decided to reach into my network of amazing people. And I know all of us have amazing people around us, but a lot of times we don't ask them their stories of how they got to be where they are, who they are, what bumps have they encountered along the way. And it's kind of easy to let our lives be about, let's go have a cocktail or let's go talk about politics or talk about whatever's happening now or COVID and how are you holding up in this time, etc. But there's a lot of food, a lot of soul food, a lot of real inspirational nourishment to be had by turning to the people in our lives and saying, tell me what you've overcome. Tell me about your journey. And it may be uncomfortable at first, but what you may also find is that you end up learning and delighting and falling even more in love with the friends you already cherish. So on that note, I am here with Toni Johnson, who has been in my life for, I think, 15 years. Is that correct, Toni?
Yeah, just about.
Yeah, we first met. She was the executive director of the American Diabetes Association in New York City. And I was on the board. It was my first experiencing and realizing I hate being on boards. Not because of Toni and not because of the ADA. I'm just really bad at being on boards, but we can talk about that some other time. Yeah. But she and I transparently and very quickly experienced a lot of kismet in our values and in our sense of life as being an unfolding and really a calling to self. And so as this series has continued, Toni and I decided to have this conversation. So help me welcome Toni. Toni, thank you so much for taking time for this.
Thanks, Tevis. Always one of my favorite people in the world. I just, like you said, we met, it just all came together beautifully. So I'm honored to be here today.
Well, I'm going to help unpack your life so people will know how much I love you and why. But first question I love to ask in these Game Changer chats is something that you will never see on a resume, very rarely hear in an elevator pitch, and oftentimes takes people by surprise when I ask it. And that's exactly why I ask it, because I'd like to think there's a human being sitting across from me, and that is, what did you most love to do as a kid?
Well, fortunately, I was born and raised in Hawaii, so I grew up barefoot, running in the sand, playing in the water, in the open air. And it's always something that's sort of footprinted on my life about being out in nature and breathing fresh air with the sunshine and everything. It's real important to me. And especially during this time, how important it is to get out and hike and walk and be part of nature. Yeah. In fact, Tevis, I was reflecting on my college yearbook quote. And it was Cahill Gibran's, forget not that the earth delights to feel your bare feet and the winds to play with your hair. And to me, that's always...
Wait. That's so beautiful. We cannot skip this. Forget not to feel...
Forget not that the earth delights to feel your bare feet and the winds to play with your hair. Now, it's interesting because in thinking about it and thinking about my game changers in my life, I look back at that quote and there's another part of it that's so appropriate for my life and lots of people. And that is and play with your hair, period. Out of suffering have emerged the strongest souls. The most massive characters are seared with scars.
Oh,
And I forgot that that was the end of that quote. So it's even more meaningful to me, you know?
yeah. You know,
So,
and I think that really speaks to something I've been a fan of examining through my own life, and that is that so often we want to look around us at people who we see doing great things and almost assign, oh, well, they can do that because, right? They can do that because they're smarter than I am, or they're this or than I am, or they had this or they, and while I'm not going to poo-poo the benefits of privilege, that's not what I'm here to comment on. I do want to say that it's when we acknowledge what a hero's fears have been, or what an iron hero, an iron giant, right, as Khalil Gibran says, what they've had to overcome to be who they are, right, to stand as that proud kind of pillar. It kind of reminds us that it's not what's holding us back, it's how we heave ourselves over that wall, right?
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me about growing up in a surfing community, because that was one of the things that that very much showed me that you were more than just a pretty blonde lady, right? With like great pearls, you know, so like picture perfect. When we first connected, about your reverence for the land where you grew up, and about being in the surfing community, and what watching that unfold taught you, and what surfing itself is such a great metaphor, I think, for a lot of what we're talking about. I would love for you to share with people kind of what you got out of that experience, because there are movies about it. I mean, Endless Summer, what, your husband was in Endless Summer?
Yeah, my former husband was in the Endless Summer. And, you know, I spent a lot of my youth hanging around with the surfers and at surfing contests and things. But beyond that, Tevis, you know, like I said, the water and the beach and everything was part of who we were growing up. And my parents had, you know, this darling little house at the beach in the north shore of the island of Oahu. And we would get up early and have breakfast and walk for miles and miles down the beach to the body surfing beach, and body surf and board surf all day till, you know, that feeling where you're so salty and so exhausted, and it's good stuff, you know.
Yeah.
And
Exertion.
and you march back in the thick sand home to get something to eat, and you're exhausted. And there's something about, for me to this day, connecting in the water, like that first dive in, and how your head hits the water, and it feels to me like a christening every single time. And so, you know, growing up in that, I probably, when I was a bratty little teenager, which I really wasn't too bad, but you know, took it for granted.
I'll give it straight. I was a horrible teenager. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
But, you know, I'm sure I took it for granted, but gosh, you know, how grateful I am for growing up there and being a part of that. And it just became part of our life. You know, I remember going to Papa, and my roommate was from Chicago, and my locker, well, foot locker, whatever, was filled with bikinis and sarongs and t-shirts, and hers was full of mittens and ear muffs, and I had no clue what that was all about, you know.
You didn't know what you were in for.
Yeah. So I just am so fortunate that I grew up in that, and that to me, you know, surfing, getting back to your question about surfing, you know, you get up on the board, you're scared, but that thrill of being on the water and going down and then falling off and getting up and doing it again till you're so physically great exhausted. You know, it's that yummy feeling of being so spent physically
Yeah.
and emotionally, and yet getting so much back from it that
Yeah.
you can sleep well and feel good and healthy. So, really, so fortunate to have been that.
Well, that vibrancy of being alive, right? People talk about
Yeah.
being tired, and like we think about couch potatoing out and how that actually makes us even more tired.
Yeah.
Whereas the tired of exertion, the tired of using our life force, feels more congruent with what nature is doing all around us,
Yeah.
right? Rest and stillness. I mean, you can think of that in terms of fall, right? We're moving into fall. I'm watching things, leaves are falling off,
Right.
trees, etc. But there's this real question around when is a time to draw inward and when is a time to exert. And so I'm curious, just to kind of move into your journey, tell me about what you thought your life was going to look like.
Well, you know, when I was like 18, I sort of was that typical, you know, I want to get married with a white picket fence and two kids, and life was going to be grand. And I was going to be a teacher because my grandmother was a teacher. She came from, you know, her family came from Portugal, and she ended up teaching in Hawaii. And my grandfather was a college professor who spoke 9 languages. So it was a little bit in my DNA, and I did love it.
Yeah.
I learned that it wasn't my calling, Tevis.
So was that
Um,
hard to tell your family? I mean, was there family pressure?
no, not at all.
Thank God.
Yeah, no, my parents were great, and they were like, do whatever you know need to do in
Yeah.
your life, get educated. You know,
Yeah.
they important, but yeah. So I had the two beautiful kids, as you know, who I
Yeah.
adore, and my grandchildren, but it wasn't enough for me, and there was something that got stuck for me teaching. I loved kids, I loved sharing, but I needed to do more in the universe, in the world. And that's what
Let's
took me.
talk about that voice though. What is that voice of not enoughness, right?
Yeah.
Because here you had it all set up, you had the qualifications, etc. Like, what is the voice of not enoughness? Because that's the voice I'm curious about, and that's the voice a lot of us hit the snooze button on
Yeah.
throughout our lives. So what was it for you, that voice of not enough?
It was, I am happy in this little bubble of teaching, and it was elementary school, young children,
Yeah.
seeing the aha moments in their lives that I
Yeah.
was helping them to find. But I wanted to move. It's hard to explain. I felt like what was missing in my life was giving back, giving more,
Yeah.
giving universally, sharing, always giving back. And although I was giving to children, I wasn't giving back. I felt to the world, to the, you know, that kind of feeling
Isn't
more.
that funny too? Because by so many measures, being a school teacher is like the ultimate in giving, right? And
Yeah.
but this really speaks to core values and shoulds in my mind. And the reason I love your example is, like, we've had a woman on here who's like gay AF. She calls herself gay as, started an LGBTQ non-discriminate, like, intimate apparel line. We've had, like,
Oh, I
I have
know
a
her.
friend of mine, yeah, we've
Yeah.
had a friend who, like, won an award from Pope Francis being a conscious capital. Right? So we've had all these various angles. But what I think is really important about you doing the self-examination that you've done, and also talking about it, is that it's a great example of how, by anyone else's measurements, you were checking even the values box.
Yeah.
right? You were checking, oh, but you are of service. You
Yeah.
are contributing. But for you, it was not enough.
But you know, the magical thing, Tevis, is that there I was teaching and all, and took my daughter, and then it wasn't feeling like enough. And
Yeah.
I forget exactly how it came to me, but a job came to my attention that was the director of youth. There you go. I was hooking into the kids. I love the kids.
Yeah, yeah,
At the
yeah.
American Red Cross. Bingo. I went in and said, I'm your girl. I am all over this job. And the funny thing is that someone said to me, go see Mr. C. He's the head of it. And I went in and I he loved me and I loved him, and I got the job, director of youth at the American Red Cross of the Hawaii State chapter. And I ran home to my dad and I said, my mother and father, and I said, I got the job. And I interviewed with Mr. Corn, and my father said, "Oh, you mean Mr. C?" And that's what everyone called him. My father had been chairman of the board of the American Red Cross, and his name was on a plaque outside the door. And I didn't
Did
even
you know that?
no, no. But in retrospect, I remembered him. He came home one day with a hard hat with ashes all over it, and he had been
Yeah.
to the volcano on the Big Island all day, inspecting it as a Red Cross board member. So I was like, holy moly, this all makes sense to me. You know, I'm
Yeah.
working with kids. My dad was connected to it. The universe works in amazing ways. And that was a
Yeah.
fantastic job. It was really my first professional job. I felt really that I had hit my sweet spot.
So you've since then have really been involved in executive roles in the nonprofit sector,
Correct.
right?
Yeah.
And um, has that always been a fit? I mean, have you always felt that you were in the right place?
Yes, I was in the Red Cross as director of youth and then
Mhm.
director of international services, and our territory was the entire South Pacific and Alaska.
Yeah.
And I traveled to Samoa many times, and one of my greatest moments, if people say to me, "What are you proudest of in,
Yeah.
in your career?" One is working as a spokesperson for the Red Cross in the third week of 9/11 in New York City. And the second one, but the first one that was being directing, coordinating, and managing a youth camp for 40 youth from all these tiny South Pacific islands. And I got their airfare paid, and they'd never been away from their little villages, Papua New Guinea,
Yeah.
Vanuatu, all of them. And we met in Western Samoa, and it was the most invigorating experience I have ever had, with 40 kids from the South Pacific who had never left their little villages coming together and learning how to prepare for a disaster, which there are many in the South Pacific, how to swim, because the highest drowning rate in the South Pacific was in Samoa at the time. And
Wow. Do they
yeah,
not learn how to swim?
no. And
Wow.
these big, tall, big Samoan kids, this is teenagers. Literally, I'd hold them up in the water, these guys, and they'd sink to the bottom. It was phenomenal to me. And by the time they left us, they knew how to swim and save lives and do CPR
Yeah.
and prepare for beyond beautiful. And so to me, it was, as you said, I've moved on in other
Yeah.
organizations,
Yeah.
small world, the nonprofit world, when you move on up to the top. But
Yeah.
each job I've had has had its own beautiful rewards and
Hmm.
many challenges, as we had at ADA.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So what do you feel like has really called on you to find your mettle, right? Um, because I think that someone coming in to hear this conversation could easily say, "Oh, well, she has had a charmed life, right? Oh, well, so she figured out being a teacher wasn't it? She landed in a nonprofit. So happened her dad had been involved in that nonprofit." And they could just say, "Oh, well, she's the beautiful blonde lady who has had a cakewalk, right, and who has had this charmed life ever since," and that sells anybody short, obviously. But what do you feel like, what's an experience that's happened to you in your life that has really taught you some sense of truth, some kernel of beauty that if you could bottle it and give it to others, that would be the thing that you would bottle and give to others. What do you feel like that experience has been?
Oh my gosh, I can name a couple, but the two that stand out in my life that were, quote, game changers for me were in 1994 when I got sober. It was absolutely the most incredible thing that I've ever done for myself.
I want to hear about that, because I think that that's incredibly instructive. So what was that like? And what prompted you? I mean, we know that so many of us are self-medicating through right now, and no judgment, by the way.
No.
God knows I am a friend of the cocktail, right? But can you unpack that just for us, just so we can kind of stand in your shoes and be with you
sure.
on.
So at the time in 1993, around that time, I had gone bankrupt with my husband and sent him out, and we got divorced. And I was a single parent with one kid in college and one kid in high school. And life was tough. And I was having a grand old time drinking lots and lots and lots of wine. And one day, my daughter, I think, said to me, "What are you doing?" And my sister did too. And I was like, "Yeah, what am I doing?" My father, by the way, had died an alcoholic. A really not very pretty death. And I marched myself, looked it up, AA meetings, went to a meeting. And the funny thing is, Tevis, I went to a meeting at a church on a Sunday, and it was in a church, basement. And I went classic for me at the time, flirt, went up to the first guy, not the woman, but the first guy I saw, and said, "How does this work?" And he said, "Well, I think you need to not see me about it, but see another woman about it and get a sponsor right away." I did 90 meetings in 90 days, stayed hooked onto a woman's group for years. And it was the best gift I have ever given myself. I've never looked back, and I've loved every minute of it. Why? Because in getting sober, I got really honest and I got really clear. And there's nothing better than living an honest life. I knew when I was drinking, it was just lie after fib after excuse, and I wasn't good to anybody. So I consider it one of my best gifts that I've ever the best gift I've ever given myself.
Yeah.
Right.
So so I want to pause just for a second, because I'm so intrigued. I mean, so many of us say we want to live a life of authenticity, right? And there's so many opinions, right? Like, can you just be a social drinker, or when do you know it's a problem? And this is not, by the way, for those of you that are watching it now or see this recording at some point, I promise you, this is not an AA proselytizing thing. This is an honest question. Like, so Toni, when you compare before and after, and you say, "Oh, I'm so much more clear, I'm so much more honest, I'm more available, I'm not, creating excuses, etc." What do you feel like that urge, like what urge drove you, uncomfortable marriage, bankruptcy, and he was kind of famous, right? Your husband was a famous surfer, right? So that had to be really hard to process. I mean, you were probably raised to think that when you got married, you were married for life.
Yeah.
and that someone was going to be there to take care of you, and suddenly you're in financial like ruin, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So when you really own up to what feelings you were avoiding, what were they? Because people are facing financial ruin. Sheltering in home right now is calling a lot of people to the mat in terms of truths about their relationships. Either they're falling in love or they're falling out of love or whatever. Like I feel like there's some wisdom to be gained by hearing what that was for you, because I don't think it's so unlike what probably a lot of people are facing now.
Yeah. So for me, there were a couple triggers. One was my relationship, my honest relationship as a loving, strong parent and woman, and to two great kids that, I think were very disappointed in their mom. And God knows I thought I was trying my very hardest and being the best mother I knew how. And I was in my way. But I found by pushing through the fear and pushing myself. Look, I was at the bottom of the barrel. I had no money. I lived in this tiny place. I lived in this big house in Maplewood, New Jersey. I had to move out to Hunterdon County in this tiny apartment. I was trying my very best. I sort of saw, the Maslow's hierarchy, and I was like, God, if I could just make spaghetti tonight and pay for $2 of gas, suddenly everything gets really, really real.
Yeah.
And drinking on top of that was just like, blah. So I'm like, I got to get clear in this life. I got to get strong. All those adversities forced me to wake up and say, for me, this isn't working.
Yeah.
It's not working with my relationships.
Oh my God. Oh, I love it. Oh, I love it, because so many of us have things that just don't work.
Yeah.
I mean, and like, again, this is not an indictment on drinking. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about all of us have things, commitments, relationships, aspects of our identity, habits, whatever that we, there's that voice inside of us. It's like, come on.
Yeah.
Come on, buck up. Right.
Yeah.
And so I love that. So thank you. Cause one thing I really love about talking to people who go through that level of transformation is the level of clarity and the level of dignity. And when they're able to talk about it without sounding like they're judgy, it's
Yeah, the beautiful thing that happened with all of this is, as hard as it was in terms of sticking to it, and going to the meeting every day before work. And I traveled an hour to work in Pennsylvania. Right when I felt really good, my job got cut in half. So I was making...
I love that. The adversity doesn't go away.
Right. I was making $37,000, and he said the job's going to be part-time. There's no way I could live on $18,000 or whatever it was. So I'm like, I can't do this. So I, for the first time in my little life, collected unemployment. But the first thing I did when I was unemployed was go to the local hospital and volunteer. Why? And this is my big sort of mantra. You got to give back. Or I felt like I had to give back. I'm not preaching, but for me, it just comes back. So there I was, unemployed, collecting unemployment. And guess what? About a month later, a friend of mine called and said, I have the perfect job for you. Yeah. And it was, again, with the Red Cross. It's a big family. And in Levittown, Pennsylvania. And it was almost triple of what I had been making.
Wow.
When I got fired. Yeah. So it's like, wow, it goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down.
Okay. So this, I think, is also worth bearing, right? Some light on, is we think the idea is, oh, well, I started to meditate and I, did this, or I did, like, it's almost like we're bargaining with God, right? That if I do the right thing in this way, then everything is going to go easy.
Right.
Right. And that is the worst thing, because then when we hit a curveball, a lot of times we use it as an excuse to revert to whatever it was that we said that we weren't going to do anymore. Right.
So I love that. I love that because for 10 years, I was happy as a clam at the Red Cross, right? Life was good. I was getting money. I cleaned my act up. My kids left the nest, all of that. Right. I even got remarried. Right. Yeah. And at the peak of my career at the Red Cross, a recruiter came and said, you've got to take this job at the American Diabetes Association where I met you. And I'm like, okay, yay. And then this part of my story. And so I went and interviewed, and I thought, this is the scariest thing I've ever done. I don't know New York City very well. This is a big job in a big city with a lot of competition, but girl, you can do this. You are set. You've got the frame of mind to be able to take that next step, which I did. Life was good. Just as I was about to start the job, my husband died. Yeah. Massive heart attack. Yeah. So I'm like, okay, well, I grieved and of course all those natural things. And I threw myself into the job in December, and in March, I found a lump in my mouth.
Yeah.
And it was cancer. And that to me was the number 2 big game changer in my life. Because when you're diagnosed with a life-threatening disease, you can take it lots of different ways. For me, it opened my life to gratitude, complete and utter. Every single day, every single minute of my life that I can think of, I sit in gratitude.
But Toni, have you also been pissed off and railed it and oh, it's not fair, and I can't, like?
Well, what do you mean, at cancer or life or
at anything? I mean, I just can't believe that you've got a superheroes like.
No, it was, God damn it, this is cancer. And for 10 minutes, they called me at work to tell me. I cried and I was going to die. And I wasn't going to see my grandchildren grow up or blah, 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 blah. And I looked in the mirror. I still remember this vividly, and cried and watched the tears come down and said, what the heck are you doing? You're going to move through this, and you're going to get through this. And Tevis, I have to say, was it scary? Oh yeah. Was I terrified that I was going to die? Yeah, but I wasn't ready, and I was going to fight. And thank God for my doctor, Dr. Dennis Krause, who's at Lenox Hill now, Sloan Kettering at the time. He's my hero. And at the beginning of COVID, well, back up. When I left Sloan Kettering, if I had had $1 million, I would have given it to them. But I wrote a letter and gave my little $100 or whatever it was, or whatever. And I wrote it in honor of him and said, he's my hero. And he wrote me back and said, no, you have this wrong, Toni. You and patients like you are my heroes. Now, when I was in the hospital, he said, you're going to get through this, and you're going to get through with flying colors because you're positive. Because the people I see that recover and move through this and grow and go on to do wonderful things are people that are positive. And those words stayed with me, So to answer your question, sure, I've been through really shitty times, and scary things have happened, and frustrating, and I'm mad at the world sometimes. But I keep going back to keep it simple. You can only control what you can only control, and give back to the world, and that's just kind of been my mantra, Tevis.
Yeah. Well, so what would you say? Because I can think back in my own life, and I can see ways in which I have been that person, right? I have been an optimist. I have kept it positive in the face of adversity, et cetera, et cetera. I also know there have been times that I have climbed into that slimy cave of I'm not good enough, or I'm not strong enough, or I'm afraid, right? All those really human emotions and feelings, right? And the the difficulty for me in just hearing an admonishment to be positive is that somehow it's kind of like getting a get well soon card, right? Somehow it's like a glossing over almost. And so how do we work with the adversities that we face in such a way that we're not almost denying them? Like, you have kids and you have grandkids now, and I know that if you tell your grandkids, just be positive, right? If you be positive, you'll get through this, right? That hearing that from grandma is going to be really, really, really helpful. But I also know that there's some inner work that has to be going on for that seed of positivity to even take root.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Well,
I'm just curious about that.
yeah, that's a great point. For me, it's like back to the Diabetes Association. I
Mhm.
remember how out of whack my work life balance was, and you're big on work life balance, and
Yeah.
I was getting up at 4:30 and catching the bus from New Jersey and working and going back and doing it over and over. And I was single, and it was just like, what the hell? This is not life as I want it. In fact, I'd find myself in the steam room at the gym, hiding in the dark corner in the steam room to just make it all go away, you know?
Yeah.
And I decided to change my career at that point and stop this insanity.
Yeah.
And I found a job making a lot less money, close to home, head of a halfway house for women, which I
I
love.
remember that. Yeah.
And to go where you were going, for me, it's like, and I mentored a friend this morning about walking through fear. And it's so scary to do that. It's like, I can do this. I can do this. And when I walk through, it's like walking through the fear. I have these giant aha moments of this surge of strength. It's like, you know, I can do this. And then you move from there. A tiny example is being in the room with the radiation machine in
Yeah.
Sloan Kettering. It was me and the machine, and the big steel door slammed behind me. And I was like, oh my God. The first day I was frantic. I was so scared. I was shaking. This big machine was on my face. But I made friends with the machine, and every day, twice a day, I would say, hi. I named it something, probably some
Mm.
Hawaiian name.
Yeah. Yeah.
You and I are going to do this together, and we're going to do
Yeah.
this. I'm not going to fight you. We're just going to do it together. And that sort of got me through that week or so of radiation. So, I mean, I think that for me, walking through, facing the fear and walking through it, it's like going through a steel curtain. It's so difficult to do. And sometimes I have to back up and go, no, 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 I can't do this today.
Yeah.
But
Hey, I think that's important though too,
yeah,
right? Is knowing where you are on your own capacity on a given day, on a given moment, and saying, is this a heavy lift day?
yeah. Well,
Right?
and I retired 2 years ago, and that to me
Mhm.
was a really scary thing to do, to write my letter of resignation.
Oh, what did it tell you about like identity? Did you fear shift in, oh my God, I'm not active, I'm not vital, am I saying I'm
Oh,
ready to die? Like, I've
oh,
heard all these things.
it's like I'm in the last season of my life, but I woke up one day and I said, I'm done. I'm done in the being paid professional life. I'm not done giving back, which is
Yeah.
what I've done. But to your point, I was like, but that was me for 30 years, speaking in a microphone, being on the stage, doing, giving, leading, managing, all of that. And like, what am I going to do every day? It's a scary thought.
That's a whole other fear. It's kind of the other thing that really comes to mind is I think about all these junctures of change.
Yeah.
Each one of them has really not only been about your relationship to the world around you, but it's also been about your identity and relationship to yourself, right? So like
Right.
being the wife of a man who's not supporting you in an unhappy, your marriage, becoming sober, like each of these involved a shift in your identity.
Yeah.
And being a survivor, like, oh well, now I have cancer, or now I'm in a not a great job situation that's asking me for so much. And there's such a subtlety to our relationship with ourselves and our identities, right? I had a book I wanted to write for a long time, and I still have the proposal for it. I will write it, you people, I promise. Called Work is More Than a 4-Letter Word. And what I've always been interested in is how precious, how covetous we are of our identity, and how when a shift happens to that we haven't invited in, and sometimes it can be a shift that we have invited in, but we're just kind of surprised of the repercussions. Like I remembered when I fell in love and got engaged. Yes, I was married, people. Being really blown away, because by that point I was in my mid-30s and I'd really identified as being this powerhouse professional, and I didn't know a lot of married women at that point who whose identity was as expressed as a professional as mine was, right? And this was just by accident of my circle, right? This isn't to say that those people aren't around and abundant, because I think they are. But the reason I want to underscore that is what really challenged me about it is this question: who am I now?
Well,
Right.
and you know, Tevis, I think it's interesting because at this point in my life, you do you start counting. Like my sister had her third child late, and she said, all I did was math all day. When he's 20, I'll be 60. When and so you start to do math at this season. Like, I'm this old, how long am I going to live? What am I going to do? And then I'm going to a little frantic sometimes. How am I going to squeeze all this stuff into the next 15 years that I'm going to live? Let's be realistic. And it gets a little scary. It's like, what do I want to do? Do I want to travel? Do I want to be? And so it's made me look at what is important at the end of the day. For me, it's my family, right? And so they're all in California. What am I doing in Washington, D.C.? What in the world am I doing here?
Yeah.
I need to get out there. And my husband, who's a darling guy who met me, we dated in college, and then he found me 30 years later.
I love that story, by the way. It's so awesome.
It's a beautiful story. But his kids are, what are we doing here? So we're considering that is a big life change.
Well, look, the thing you were saying, I started counting.
Yeah.
Right. Like really thinking about, but whether or not you have 15 years or whether or not I die before you.
Right.
Shouldn't we be having that values clarification every freaking day?
Yes.
Because there are no guarantees.
Right. But when I was professional, I was caught up in all of it, all of the dance, right?
Yeah.
And the dance has slowed down. And I can read, and I can walk, and I can exercise, and I can call friends, and I can do all these lovely things that I didn't have time for. Mm-hmm. But I only have 15 more years or something. Like, yikes.
Okay, but here's what I'm saying from your example is that all of us should be asking ourselves that right now. People, life is short.
Yeah. Yeah. And
we may all die before Toni. Toni may outlive us all.
But Tevis, I kind of kick myself for not doing that before. Like, why didn't I think of that? Why?
That's why I'm underscoring it, because we all take it for granted. We take our
Yes.
health for granted. We take our
Yeah.
timeline for granted. And granted, COVID, the political instability, because I've heard it called a cold civil war is what we're in the middle. We just haven't had arms yet. We've got an economy that's unpredictable. Global warming, you as a lover of the earth, I know you're mindful of. And this is a mandate for us to start to value this moment now. Don't wait for what Toni waited for to start to go, whoa,
Yeah.
whoa.
Yeah. Yeah. Whoa is right. And it's like, God, I got to get out to California now. I got to sell my stuff and do this. And now
Yeah.
I can work myself up into a frenzy about it because there's so many unknowns. It's so, all of the what if,
Yeah.
trying to stay present, but holy moly, when
Carpe
you're
diem.
yeah. So anyway, I mean, right now I'm on a board, I'm an acting chair of a board that's awesome. They've been at the front lines during COVID. And again, I find myself loving giving back and being a part of that whole thing. But, Tevis, like you said, gosh, life is so precious. It really, COVID has reminded us of that day in and day out. You watch these stories, crazy. That what are we waiting for?
What are we waiting for?
What is the meaning and where are we going? What are we doing? So, yeah.
Well, Mama, I'm so grateful to you for sharing this story, because it's like, I'm just curious, whoever has popped in to hear this or whatever, turn to someone you love or you've known for long to ask them these questions. Like, what do you feel like has really defined you? What was the rock you didn't think you could lift, right? What has been the late aha? Like, these are the stories that help us clarify our own journeys. And so I'm really grateful to you, Toni, for your transparency about your life and your journey. And
well, Tevis, you're one of my favorite people in the world. And is Ruby still with you?
I have to lock her in her kennel during these conversations. Okay, here's my shameless plug. People, get my book. If you want to game change, what Toni's talking about is radical success, the kind of success that comes from who you really are, not who you think you should be. And I am kicking off a mastermind on Tuesday, September 2nd. Is that the 2nd? Yeah. That's going to be 1 hour a week. You and other like-minded people who really want to use this time to shift. And I'm going to give it to you straight. We're moving into fall. The leaves are changing. The world is changing by the second. And you don't have to have a Twitter feed to be aware of that, right? So my question is, what are you doing to align with you, to change you, to be true to you along that journey? Because I want you with me. Okay, so yeah, and I'd love for you to come do it. Anyway, if you want more information about that, go into our website at balanceintegration.com and stay alert, because we are having these conversations, if not weekly, pretty frequently. Every time I meet someone that I'm like, I really need to shine a light on them to have the story come forward. So again, Toni, thank you so much. I'm really, really, really grateful. And thanks everyone for tuning in. And go get radical, because you have it in you. You have it in you. Okay, guys, bye.
Bye.